And great to see you all. I'll go ahead and start. I'm actually a member of the Toastmasters International world, and one of the rules that we have is start on time and end on time. So I'll respect that, and we gave a grace period of about 3 minutes. And nice to see you all. I'm a regular attendee. I'm usually camera off in my car listening. And it was, Mann has invited me multiple times, and I'm usually the one actually recommending other great speakers and individuals that are doing wonderful work. But for those of you that don't know anything about me, I'll just share with you that I was born in Palestine, and my family immigrated in 1968. So what is known as the small village of Anabta on the West Bank, close to Nablus and close to the Tulkarm area. That's where I was born. We actually lived in Kuwait for a few years before we came to the US. And when we came to California, the city of angels. And I often say that we were met with grace and not hate. As a child, I remember people really reaching out to help us. I was in English as a second language student. And I think from the beginning of time, especially as an immigrant, we knew that we were Palestinian. We knew that we were Muslim. We knew that we were Palestinian. And I'll take you back to, I would have only been eight years old at the time. So I was born in 1960. And just probably in the first few years, back then we didn't have 24-hour news and pundits and all that we see all day long. When the news came on, it was like the 7 p.m. news or it was the 9 p.m. news, and that was it. It would come and it would go. And one of my strongest memories is when somebody would come on the news, and my mom would be in the kitchen, my dad would be at work, and I'm talking about like the evening, and we would be sitting in front of the TV, and we'd like yell to my mom, the news is on, the news is on. And it was almost like it was her role to know what was happening, and we were alerting her. But I do remember when they would bring the spokesperson to speak on behalf of the Palestinians. When they would bring the speaker to speak on behalf of the Israelis, it was someone that was articulate, well-polished, easy to connect with. Then they would flip and show you someone speaking on behalf of the Palestinians, and it was a heavy accent, broken English, hard to connect with. And I remember as a child saying, why don't we have someone that can speak better on our behalf? And honestly, it wasn't until many years later that Hanan Ashrawi showed up. And I remember the first time I heard her speak, how impressed I was. And so all of this is to say how important our communication skills really are. So, and I mentioned even early on that I'm a member of Toastmasters. So that's a public speaking group, international, been around more than 100 years. And I've often been asked, and specifically there was one incident a few years ago where a friend of mine who, she's much taller, she's Latina, she has a strong voice, strong personality. And she said to me, Manal, why do you invest so much time in Toastmasters? And there's something you all should know about. There's something called an emotionally charged connection. And it's like figuring out why you do what you do. And I remember in that moment, I figured out why I invest so much time. Because people have said to me, go to the National Speakers Association. That's where the pros are. That's where you get really better. But it was never about, trying to speak as a career for me, as much as the importance of making myself clear so people understood, whether it was persuasion, connection, clarity. And think of all the times that you've heard people speak, and the person that is clear, you want to even hear more from, versus, and I sometimes tell people your intelligence is equated to how well you communicate. And so now I actually even teach public speaking in the prison. I have a program that is a personal development program, and I also do the TED Talks. So that's my background. But also part of my background is my family. Both of my parents are Palestinian, born there, all of us five children. So from really a very young age, it's very much part of my DNA. We knew what was happening back home. We were connected. We still had relatives there. And it wouldn't be until I was in high school that we would travel back. And this is like in the 70s, 77, that I would go back for the first time. And then now, since I got married in 87, we started going with some regularity. We actually have a place in Ramallah and another place in Rawabi. And of the 5 kids growing up, everybody thought that I would be the least likely to go back. And if all of my siblings, I'm the one that is the most connected. It goes back with frequency and has a place. So let's talk about, the conversation. And when I describe myself very often, I call myself a cross-pollinator, meaning that when I'm sitting in a room, and if I attend and I pay money to go learn from a guru, leadership guru like a Tony Robbins, which I've done for a few years, I'm listening to him and I'm saying, what can I learn? And take that back to the liberation of Palestine. It is always top of mind. It's in my heart. It's something I constantly think about. And so that is where the cross-pollination comes in. And I think for me personally, like I always say, learning is my thing. I love learning. And that is something that I enjoy and why I continue to come to these meetings. And I applaud you for those of you that are blocking out time to come in weekly to meet the different activists and advocates and people that are doing work. The other thing that I tend to do is I love aggregation work, meaning that there's so much good work that's happening, and very often we don't know that it's happening. And yet, if we can continue to bring all of this together so people are better connected, make better contacts, and can amplify that work, I think that's where we can get to the tipping point. So really, my topic today is getting us to that tipping point. Now, something else I can share is I'm currently serving on the Council on American Islamic Relations, which is America's largest civil rights and advocacy organization. So I'm the national board chair. And I'm proud of that. And yet at the same time, people have said to me, Manal, do you really want to put your name behind an organization that's such a heavy target? And if we continue to play in the phase of fear, where would we all be? And I think the thing that I love most is when I keep hearing that Gaza liberated us. And it liberated me personally. It liberated many of us. For example, where I live, I'm a business person. I live in a deep red community. The Trump signs actually went up after he lost the first time. Or, after he had served and he ran against Biden and he lost, you would think people would start taking their signs down. It actually doubled. So that is the community I live in. And I think because there isn't a large Palestinian community, not necessarily around me in Ocala, where there is in Tampa and Orlando, I was able, I think, when you see the suffering and you see the true genocide like we've never seen before, and even though we follow, it's interesting, your point of entry. So there's an amazing TED Talk by a woman, and it's called, let me think of her name, Shimende, I think is her name, and she talks about the danger of a single story. You need to look that one up. Excellent. And in the danger of a single story, she actually makes reference to Palestine. And she tells us, thank you, Shamanmanda, excellent. So she basically talks about how important it is that people understand, because your entry into a story can really influence how you assess what you just noticed. And when you think about people coming in to the story, to the Palestinian struggle and occupation and atrocities, so many people didn't know anything. They weren't paying attention. And October 7th happens, and now they're new. And I'll share a quick anecdotal fun story that my brother out in California shared with me. And this is now probably February of 2024. He said he's at a coffee shop in LA. And the girl that's standing in front of him is a teenager, blonde, and she has a keffiyeh on. So he taps her and he says, I like your keffiyeh. And she smiled and he says to her, I'm Palestinian. And she starts sharing information. He was unbelievably impressed by how much she actually knew. So she knew more. It wasn't like, what river, what sea? She knew history. And she had just recently learned a lot about that. And then she even proceeded to say to him, tomorrow I'm going to get arrested. And he's like, why? And she's like, I can't tell you. Just listen to the news. And that is when they shut down the freeway, the LA freeway back in, if you guys Google, February 2024. So, and just in that moment, and that example is a beautiful example of how, people have started to enter an understanding. And really, if October 7th did anything, is it brought attention to the atrocities of what was happening in Palestine. And many of us that are part of this movement, and I think all of you have already said this many times, we always say it didn't start on October 7th. There was an excellent article that was written by a gentleman many years ago. And again, it's easily we can access it, find it online. I think his name is Ferrari Shepherd. And he speaks about that he went on a trip to Palestine through the Carter Center in Georgia. And the title of his article is that there is no conflict. He said there's absolutely no conflict. It's an occupation, it's not a conflict. And he basically describes the whole dehumanization process, and probably early on. I think now we all understand the power of dehumanizing people. We've seen that. But if you call someone a rat or a cockroach or a snake, it becomes perfectly fine for us to hurt them. Correct? And I think, I see that Tony's with us today. So, great to have you, Tony. Tony's voice is so powerful. And I recall early on even attending conferences, and I would say to Dr. Hatem Bazian is, but we need other, it's the other voices that really get elevated and amplified because they're not Palestinian. And he's like, no, but they have to hear from the horse's mouth. And so I say to my Palestinian friends, it's just as important for us to be doing the education and creating the awareness. Which really brings me to another important point, and that is being always speaking about Palestine. How do we do that? I go back to that George Galloway story. People familiar with George Galloway from the UK? A few nods. I have his video of, when I heard that, it was so impressive, and I still have it. It's, on the old fashioned, a DVD or CD that you have. And he's spoke about his, he had just been elected. He was in the, House of Parliament. There's a knock on the door. It's like 4 PM. He debates if he should answer the door or not answer the door. He does. And it's like a student from Jordan. It's not even a Palestinian student. And then he continues to talk to him. And that was his entry. And really, he's such a fierce and wonderful advocate for Palestine. But it started with that conversation. So I'm here to say to all of us, we must continue to speak about Palestine and find wonderful opportunities to do that. I recently traveled to Colombia with my husband has a chiropractic office, medical practice, and one of our doctors had said to us, listen, that dental work in Colombia is like pennies on the dollar. I've taken my mother, I've taken some friends, I'm going, and our daughter had 4 impacted wisdom teeth. So my husband agrees to have our, 25-year-old daughter travel to Colombia with the doctor, his mother, and I said, well, I'm going. I'm not sending her by without a parent. And I tell you this, there was another person on that trip. And he was very interested in public speaking and leadership. And we got into the conversation about Palestine. And now I get daily messages from him. Someone that really didn't know hardly anything about anything. Could he become the next George Galloway? I don't know, but it's important to have conversations. So my ask is that we all continue to find ways, not just to post, but to have good conversations to educate people. Because I think one of my favorite websites is If Americans Knew. And if you look at her mission, when she talks about it, she said like the highest level of democracy, it's not the government, it's really the people. And if the people are miseducated, they will do the wrong thing. And she basically, her goal was to start reporting, things that were not being reported or that were being misreported. But again, like she has a really nice, succinct message on there that's super powerful. So this brings me to an example of how we need to continue to educate and how it can be a difference maker. Back in 2011, Laila, the daughter that went to get her teeth pulled, was in 7th grade. And back then in 2011, not everyone had their cell phone available all the time with them. Okay, so imagine a 7th grader, middle schooler. And it's early in the morning and I get a text from her where, she took it out of her backpack and she sends me a text and she says, the teacher is teaching us about the Holocaust. Is it okay if I ask her why we don't learn about the Nakba? So I replied, I said, yes, go ahead and ask her. And her next text to me is, do I ask her in front of all the kids or do I do it privately? And I said, just raise your hand and ask her politely. So the teacher proceeds to tell Laila, what do you guys think she told her? I don't know anything about the Nakba. Would you like to teach us? So Laila now, 2 weeks later, she prepares almost like those science, trifold posters, and she's to give a presentation before the school starts. This is now a magnet program that she's in, a magnet school. And lo and behold, who's there is a school board member. African-American Bobby James, school board member, is in the room. He hears the presentation, the kids hear the presentation, Laila does an amazing job, and that event happens. Now, Laila had her group of friends and she had gifted all of them one of these bracelets that you guys are familiar seeing. So we have beautiful pictures where a bunch of kids are holding hands and you can see the bracelet. Fast forward to high school now. So we will go from middle school to high school, and she's in an IB program, the International Baccalaureate program. It's her junior year. And she's in her class. The history teacher is talking about Israel, Palestine, and some kid raises their hand and says, I don't think what you're teaching us is correct. You need to talk to Laila. Laila's from there. Laila travels there. And the teacher's like, who's Laila? So they actually call her, they call the switchboard, they find out what class she's in, they bring her to the class. Laila starts speaking and teaching. And so now you have, when Laila's not even in the room, you have a group of advocates that were created from her previous teaching and interactions and relationships. So let's not forget about relationships. And then come high school year, every year they choose a project that's for your diploma. So where the kids have to research something in depth and present on it and take an exam on it. So her senior year, the very next year, that year, it was the Palestine, what they call the Israel-Palestine conflict. And we had students coming to our home consistently asking for education and training. So can one person make a difference? I say absolutely. I want to give you a really powerful example of the importance of speaking and also not knowing who's in the room and why we must always find great opportunities, create opportunities to speak up, and really, doing it in a gracious way, even better than just yelling. I think you get further. Last year, I attended ArabCon in Michigan, which is sponsored by the Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee, ADC. They awarded Macklemore, who, by the way, honestly, I didn't even know Macklemore until he started coming out on Palestine. He wasn't someone I personally followed. And boy, do I love his work. But when he received his award, before he received his award, the person that introduced him also was a Palestinian that became friends with him. And they started sharing stories. Because you wonder, like, sometimes you ask yourself, how did Macklemore become such an advocate and activist, for Palestine? It was through a friendship, through a relationship. And that gentleman was there to present and tell the backstory. And Macklemore said that he himself was concerned. He was worried, like, should I speak out? Should I, what will it do to my career? He actually said this publicly. I mean, you can find that probably recorded. And he said, I just needed to hear from one person, just one person. And it was Kalani. Kalani actually said something like on social media, and he said, that's all I needed. And then he started, and, the songs that he sang, in beautiful songs. And of course, you have, now wonderful, amazing examples of artist after artist after artist, correct? You've all seen that. We're always like shaking our head like, wow, this is unbelievable. So thankfully, and this is where we also have regular small wins. I want you to hold on to that thought, having these small wins consistently. A quick example I want to give you also is, remember early on, after October 7th, a lot of the activity and energy was around ceasefires at city halls. We would see video after video, clip after clip, people going to city hall. And again, what I would describe my city to you, Trumpy, deep red. Like people say, now we're not red, we're deep red. And I had just basically written off, going to city hall because I knew what the reaction was. And yet what I loved is some of our allies, it wasn't even the Muslim community, it was others that really wanted to protest. So they were doing weekly protests on the corners of the street. And then when we said, well, you know what, and this is why it's important to do work and to aggregate our work and to amplify our work, because it actually creates space for those of us that might not believe that we can do something to actually join and to start helping. So in the end, I decided, well, you know what, let's go to City Hall. We know we're not who they are and how they'll behave, but let's not go on the record that we didn't take any action. And so we started to go week after week, and to the point where they actually changed the routine of city council meetings, where public comments no longer were at the beginning of the meeting. They said, moving forward, and this is after like 8 weeks of us, going week after week and them denying, is they said, public comments will be taken at the end of the meeting. So were we effective? I think we were effective in that we had to irritate them enough that they had to change their process. Now, another example that I would like to share that happened for me personally, and I think sometimes isn't it amazing? You say to yourself, how is it that I saw that today? So I'm on, I get lots of emails like the rest of you, but I'm also a member of what we call the Chamber and Economic Partnership. And on a Monday, I noticed, and I almost never open this email, and somehow for whatever reason I opened it, and what do I see? That Congressman Randy Fine of Florida is coming to speak at the chamber. And I didn't tell you, I'm a former, I was the former board chair of our chamber. I have done so much work for our chamber from years back. And I thought to myself, I can't, I have to change my schedule. I need to be there. And I didn't even spend a lot of, I found out just that morning, but there's a close friend of mine, Lisa, who Bob knows. And I messaged Lisa, I said, Lisa, would you come with me? I just have someone maybe to record something. And another friend, Barbara. So I had maybe a handful of friends that I reached out to, but I didn't put a concerted ton of effort trying to mobilize people. To my surprise, when I got there was actually a group, and I took a photo, and I have it, of maybe like a dozen people. I guess they call themselves the Blue Dots, is the name of the group. And they had signs, and they were protesting Randy Fine. So when we go up there, I look around, and there's not that many people in the room. It's mostly the ambassadors. And I'm asking one of the ambassadors, why did you guys even invite him? Do you know who he is? And AIPAC is distancing itself from him. I said, the people we distance ourselves from are distancing themselves from him. Why would you bring him? Oh, we're not political. We just, they want to come. So we provide the space. So Randy Fine comes, and he does this quick, shaking hands around the room. There's only a few people. I did not extend my hand. So he quickly picked up, this girl is not on my side, because I didn't, where other people were, compliant and shaking hands. And then he starts to speak and gives his whole story of how he went into Congress and, in helping Trump and all of this stuff. And then, it's supposed to be Q&A. And they go, no, we're not taking any Q&A. And there's another friend from my Rotary organization that was there, John Elliott, who is an American Jew. And he taught me something that day. But what ends up happening, and we have this on video, but I actually am embarrassed to share it. I chase him around the room, and I start saying things like, Randy Fine, you're a baby killer. You're a genocider. The AJC doesn't want to connect with you. Your party doesn't want to connect with you. He runs down the stairs. And I'm trying to remember the word that my friend John Elliott taught me. And he said that he yelled at him to tell him, you're not a good Jew. I'm trying to remember what the word is. I'd have to go back in my text messages and look it up. So the point of this little interaction is how important it is. In that moment, I honestly realized how valuable it was for us to show up and let him, and for his staff to see, because they had security, they had staff, they had the ambassadors. There was not a big turnout. And later I was told from the CEP people, the chamber people, that they're actually someone that had internal information, but they're trying not to announce their visits because they know they're going to get pushback. Apparently he feels like he has to do this to show up and get it on the calendar, but they're getting a lot of pushback from a lot of people, thankfully. So that is just another example, I would say, of empowerment. And then the other thing I wanted to mention is, how important language is. And with language, when you see the word war, let's ask ourselves, what is the definition of a war? Can we describe what's happening in Gaza as a war? We need to be smart about, and I've noticed more and more people doing that, where they'll say, let me correct the headline, New York Times, let me correct the headline for you. So we need to use the right words really to explain what is happening in Palestine and in Gaza. And I would just challenge us to also, do a good job with that. Now, other things that we can look at when we say about, small wins and, changes and what's happening is there has been several organizations that have popped up that are doing excellent work. So the first one I want to mention, one of my favorites, is DropSite. Are you guys following? Do you guys follow DropSite? So DropSite, their emails, and this is Ryan Grimm and Jeremy Scahill. They were formerly with The Intercept. They had started The Intercept, and honestly, sometimes when you know the people, you kind of find out the backstory of why they had to leave The Intercept and start DropSite because of the sentiment at the board level, et cetera. Even though if you look at The Intercept right now, they're still publishing some things that are important in terms of Gaza. Of course, also Zeteo with Mehdi. Many of you, he's a well-known figure, a great debater, just a great speaker. Another one's a new policy with Josh Paul and Tariq Habash. So, excellent work, what they're doing, and they're actually in the process of launching a platform when we keep donating and using Act Blue for the Democrats, for example, or Win Red for the Republicans. So they're coming up with their own platform, which is a smart way for us to start aggregating our money and pooling our money so that you can follow. So candidate, like right now, Graham Plantner of Maine has a link. So when you donate to Graham, you're actually using a new policies link. So I think that is an idea that has way that we needed to bring way earlier. So I'm thankful and proud of them for initiating it, and they're still working on having more campaigns to be a part of that. Lots of good work is happening now with the IMU policy project. So IMU has been around for more than 20 years. They launched their C4, so we have the IMU policy project. The other thing I wanted to mention is how important it is, and for me personally, maybe some of you as well, it's easy to feel overwhelmed, that there's so much that we can do, so many emails, so many actions, things that need our attention. And that is why we need to really be smart about how we do the work, and rather than being duplicative, really like figure out who's the best one to deal with legal. Can we fortify that? Can we connect the people together? Just the other day, I was in a WhatsApp group and I saw something about the Israeli bonds. I quickly shot it to Lydia and to Valentina. They're not in that group. But if it takes a second or 30 seconds to do something that can help someone else, you don't know what relationship and connection and how they can now multiply that work. Do those sorts of things is what I'm saying. So my quick story here is Fortune Magazine. You guys familiar with Fortune Magazine? Yes? So most people are off camera. I appreciate Karina being on camera and smiling, and Bob. I've got Tony here. But so the big question is, why do CEOs fail? And overwhelmingly, the number one response was lack of vision. Lack of vision. But that's not the right answer. It's not lack of vision. It's lack of action. That is why CEOs fail. So we have to remember how important it is for us to take action. And so with some of the groups that I've been in recently, we're starting to make commitments. Are you willing to commit to spend an hour a week coming to a group like this? And how important it is right now for us to shoulder each other and be in community with each other and to ask each other questions and to find out what's happening. That is how we don't check out and we don't just go back to our normal life, because it's easy to do that. We need this type of platform to continue to do that. So and then the other thing is always thinking about, who else can I bring along? Is there someone else that I need to be having a conversation with or educating to continue to increase our group? And now let me just try to spend a few minutes. I'm happy to take any Q&A, and if we end early, we end early. Is how do we get to the tipping point? And I'd love to find out from the rest of you, what thoughts you may have. So let me just grab my notes of getting to the tipping point. Don't ever be this little. Here we go. Okay, so I put them to the side. So getting to the tipping point, I would say that we have to have concrete and coordinated pathways. And something that I haven't seen done, and if you have, please let me know, because I know I'd love to hear from you, and that would be another introduction, is to be able to have a sequenced pressure, meaning that we would calendarize and synchronize our actions. So imagine if we had an international escalation calendar. And the sequence could be, for example, you release your legal report, you coordinate any divestment deadlines, and then whether you're talking about universities or pension funds, you start synchronizing the mass mobilization. Are we targeting shareholder votes and corporate actions? And then pushing for, parliamentary and ministerial type votes. For example, arms embargo. Block the bomb. You've heard of the block the bombs to Israel? And I think it's 3635 is the legislation sponsored, awesome, by Delia Ramirez. And so God bless her. Right now, we're up to 53 members of Congress that have signed block the bombs. And who was I listening to that was saying that, the only thing that pierced this guy's consciousness, all the bombing that had happened, I think I was listening to a podcast, and, he just wasn't doing it. It wasn't until that he heard a story about how the soldiers were going in at night and basically waking up kids and asking them questions and just terrorizing them at night. And it was that action that he heard about that finally kind of turned on the switch for him to terrorize kids when they're asleep in their homes at night in their most private place. He wasn't going to have that. And sometimes you hear that war is overwhelming. And honestly, how did we all really connect with Anthony when he first became the whistleblower that we now, love to, have his voice being heard and invited? It was a story of Amin. Is it Amir or Amin, Tony? You're muted, yeah. Now try.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, now we can hear you.
Yeah, the story, the young boy Amir from
Amir.
Distribution Site 3. Yeah.
Now that story, really, again, it's the human element, because, you see the bombing day after day, and it's so sad because you get to the point where it's not even being reported. And I recall so many years ago, I can't remember the exact year, where it was the 3 Israeli, college-age kids that were killed. And all of a sudden, because before, just like now, the media was not allowed. They were shooting rubber bullets at the media to get them out. They would not let the media in. And then these 3 Israeli kids are killed, and it's all over the news. You had members of Congress, because one of them, our member of Congress, Kathy Castor from Florida, went, members of Congress were traveling to Israel to offer their condolences to the parents. It's like night and day. It's not even like night and day. It's unbelievable of how you treat one side and the other side. Even when you think of someone with a status like a Shireen Abu Akleh, the journalist that was so beloved. And to this day, has been no justice for that killer. Thankfully, you had Senator Chris Van Hollen that has been outspoken, and so I have to commend him, and he's been good about some more recent cases as well. And we have some kids that are still in prison. So back to how do we get to the tipping point? There's probably dozens of things that we need to do. And my other question is, where are the gaps? What are we doing really well? What are we just now, new to? When it comes to media, we're still new, but we're making great progress. So I would say something else that we need to be talking about is having smart, specific targets instead of broad condemnation. So having targeted leverage points. So if we, for example, focus on choke points, such as major arms suppliers. So let me tell you how arms suppliers work. In the city where I live, there is Lockheed Martin. What does Lockheed Martin do? Do we know what kind of company Lockheed Martin is? And precisely, I was on the board of United Way when we had a Lockheed Martin representative on our board. They sponsor our events. They're thought of as a community member. They're not thought of, hey, this is a company, a weapons company. And what is the weapons company doing? The platform TED, the Technology Entertainment Design Platform? Lockheed Martin cannot be a sponsor of any TED events. That platform is about making the world a better place. The tobacco companies cannot be your sponsors. So they actually have guidelines and restrictions of who can sponsor your TED event as you're doing these TED talks. So again, understanding, where we need to put pressure and being very specific so that we can actually see, even a handful of corporate exits can go a long way. A third thought, and something that we need to be thinking about, is how do we amplify some of the legal victories into actual policy change? So this takes time, and even the rulings that we saw at the ICC and the ICJ, those are catalysts, but we need to be able to turn them into actual policy changes. A fourth thing that I would believe would be good for us to be thinking on is mobilizing all the allied institutional actors with hard power, such as the unions, the religious bodies, and the municipal governments. So this group that exists, that is now known as Eyewitness Palestine, used to be called Interfaith Peace Builders. So back in 2011 and 2012, I was actually, first I attended as a delegate with them, and then later I was on their steering committee. So they're currently now called Eyewitness Palestine. So they would take delegations. And when they would take us as delegates, first they would train us on how to get in. So they tried to stay under the radar. And there was no public announcement. They were doing a meeting, like we would actually all meet in DC before we would board the flights, separately to meet there. So what we realized and what we learned is that what our cousins or the other side was doing is they had started basically pinpointing and focusing on the African-American community. So they were leading delegations that were focused on the pastors and the clergy. Smart, right? Because all of those individuals, leaders, are leading big congregations. And that is where, I keep saying to myself, like, we need to be ubiquitous. We need to be everywhere. And, that is how, it's drip by drip, it's action by action. That is how we will get to the tipping point. I recall being at a conference again back in 2011, 2012. And at that conference, there was a film called Roadmap to Apartheid. I don't know if any of you have heard of it. And it was new back then. And one of the things that the filmmaker said to me outside of the session, he said, when apartheid South Africa happened, like when we went to bed that night, we didn't realize that we were going to wake up and that apartheid would have fallen. And so it's going to be the accumulation of the flotillas, of the Israeli bombs, all of these protests that we're doing, the student encampments. It's not one thing. It's going to be all of the things that we're doing. And so I just want to encourage us in coordinating better. I think that's a lot of times where we fall behind is in the coordination. And then, of course, we know that in the end, it's about money. And, often anything that we're reviewing, we're looking at where does this lead? And, they say just, follow the trail. And it's often money. So if we can scale up the shareholder investor pressure, I believe that would be a really good move for us. And then the Global South diplomatic concert and multilateral leverage is another one. So what we're seeing, for example, that concert that happened in UK, people are saying how effective a concert like that is and how you can bring new people, because we want to always be bringing new people to the game, to this liberation. And then I'm going to finish by talking about an initiative that we started in April of 2024. So October of 2023, April 2024 now is Ramadan. But we felt that even though it was Ramadan, that we really, it was urgent. We had to get organized. So a group of us got together and we actually went through the different Palestinian leaders and invited them to convene in DC. And what came out of that convening was what we call the Palestine Election Strategy, or now we just call it PES. And so you have, leaders from IMEU and ADC and American Muslims for Palestine and the U.S. campaign. There are about 40 people together. And we continue now, ever since that convening, we have some subgroups. So we have people that are actually working on the candidates, reviewing them. Where do they fall? Who do we need to support? Who do we need to primary? So some of that work is starting to happen. So I just wanted you to know. So election strategy is just one pathway. Secondly, the other thing that we do is a media and messaging weekly meeting. And I love that because we come together and we're hearing from the pros from IMEU, and it really gives you a chance, within a 30-minute window every Monday, you're getting all the top stories in any actions. And it's just another great way, just like this meeting, we bring different speakers. In our case, we're not bringing any new speakers. It's the same group coming together to talk about current events and what needs to be amplified and what we can do. And if people have questions, they can ask questions. So the PES group has also now morphed into a second leg of Palestine liberation strategy. And when we look at Palestine liberation strategy, now you're talking about, culture, you're talking about politics, you're talking about advocacy, philanthropy, it's media, and now that's starting to get rolled out. And then I'll also share, both Bob and I, and even Anthony I don't know who else is in the room because I can't see everyone here. We all attended the event. Nizar, were you there also for Know Thy Heritage? So think of Know Thy Heritage as an organization, small organization. They had their 11th annual conference. But what's smart about what Ratib, the founder, does is he takes students from around the globe. Like it's not just U.S.-based students back to Palestine to really connect with their heritage. And he also offered an opportunity for us to look at 3 work groups on that last day of the conference. And for example, the group that I was a part of was about advocacy. And the thing that we focused on, again, is back to language. And with language, for example, when we talk about that it wasn't, people continue to call Hamas a terrorist group. And when people ask me, is Hamas a terrorist group? I say to them, and I say to you, is as soon as you understand that the IDF, or better known as the IOF, is the #1 terrorist organization, then I can say that Hamas is a terrorist organization. For me, what I really see with Hamas is that they are a liberation organization. They're a resistance organization. How do you resist an occupation? And I 100% believe that if we were just presenting a scenario without giving names of Palestinians and Israelis, would we allow it to happen? Would we allow the things that we hear, coming right out of, in the photos that we see, and the bragging rights about how they're bombing and killing and wearing women's nightwear? Would we allow, and would we just continue to do this? It just baffles me that how much we allow, and I don't know where the conditioning has been that people aren't just outraged. Where's the backlash of that? We're seeing some of it, thankfully, but not to the degree that we should see it. So I would say, in the end, and I'm going to close up and I'll take any questions, like I said, is all the work that we're doing, I believe, needs to be nonviolent. It needs to be rights-based, and also centering it around Palestinian agency. And I think that's how we can get to the tipping point. So I'm happy to just, finish by saying, please, keep teaching, keep speaking. It's hard work and it's heartbreaking. And it's, even now with this 20-point plan that is being rolled out, and a lot of times, those of us that don't have, perhaps we're not analysts, not every one of us is an analyst. We all have our gifts and we all have ways to be influential and to help. But not everyone can maybe understand the depth of politics. When I was young, and imagine my father, you could watch the news and listen to what you heard and think that to that degree of what you heard. And then my father would, say no. He would tell me something and it would be completely different. I was like, you got all of that? I didn't get all of what he just finished teaching me and explaining to me, because he understood it more deeply. So I'm humble enough to know that I'm not an analyst. I'm very active, and I have been, and I'm very passionate, and I'm very engaged. But I will leave the analysis to those that are experts. And that's why when you look at someone like a Josh Paul, who's worked in government, who understands, who's now dedicating his time as a career, he's not a volunteer. Those are the voices and the people that we need to have in our circles to learn from. And with that, I'm happy to open it up for any questions.
Thank you. So I think kind of sort of the impact that we have seen, I think kind of over the last year of the kind of movement has overwhelmed Israeli systems. They didn't expect this. They forgot about social media. And so that was kind of a miscalculation. So they're catching up. So my question would be is, we now know that Netanyahu is kind of putting 45 million into a propaganda campaign with YouTube and Google. Mm-hmm. How are we going to encounter that? More kind of sort of like, have you thought about that? And what is your kind of like thinking of how we could kind of encounter?
Yeah, thank you. And actually, social media, I didn't touch on it at all, is a great tool. I often, think back to what it was like to communicate, even back in the college days, how did we, before cell phones, how did we connect with each other? You went and left a note on somebody's dorm room, meet me for dinner in the cafeteria. We didn't have all the tools that we have. So, and I think it is a game changer, thankfully. And it's funny, I remember the first time I heard about Twitter, I remember exactly where I was in the conversation I was having. I remember exactly when I learned about TikTok and even Facebook, before, believe it or not, especially my age, we there was an article in our local paper that said, parents flock to Facebook. And we had heard that it was a dating, that's what we thought. And then before that was what is called MySpace. And, people kind of shamed MySpace that you're letting predators into your kid's room, and then Facebook shows up. So back to your specific question, I think when it comes to the money, what we have seen is that it's always higher from the other side. And we need to also be smart about resources. And what's great is honestly, and what warms my heart, and I think early on, as early as back in October, some videos that showed up, and you see this, there's one that I particularly love, and it was one of the first ones that was created, and it was created beautifully, and it was showing all around the world, country after country, and you see that, and the gentleman they were interviewing was I've never seen it, I'm Palestinian, I've never seen it like this before. And we hear and we see, for example, what Italy was doing, the protests. Thankfully, people are awakening. And we don't have to have as much money because I think we have the need, people have to understand that I always say, don't be pro-Palestine, be pro-justice. Just be pro-justice, because if you're pro-justice, then that is where, you will be able to actually make it done. So that way people don't like to take sides. And I love what Mehdi Hassan said this past weekend at the event that we were at when he accepted his award. And he's like, the people that are the worst people are the people that are complicit. The people that are in the middle, and they just like, I don't know, they take that stand. Those are the people that you want to really kind of shake. And thankfully, I actually have a nonprofit called Ollin Women International. It's a group of women. And the reason I started it is because I knew a neighbor who is Jewish. And she didn't even know the difference between Palestine and Pakistan, And I thought, listen, and what I love is when you start entering the circle of peace building, they know about Palestine. And it's heartwarming. It's like, I don't have to explain. I went to a conference in Toronto and there was literature, there was support. And the group that I want to really applaud today is also Code Pink. If you're not a member of Code Pink, if you're not following Code Pink, consistently, amazing work. So amazing work. So to answer the question on social media, it's an important tool. I think, we're seeing good, people are actually utilizing it. And even if he does that, I think, just people being aware of the propaganda. And what's amazing is the voices that are coming out, even from the other side, from the Israeli side themselves, basically admitting, what they're doing. So little by little, I think, you're going to have a certain percentage that's resisting, but I think, we're continuing to win people over to understand what's happening.
Thank you.
Is there a second question?
Yep, I'll go now. Thanks, Manal, for being here. And also, I keep thanking Salman for his help in getting access to some of the people that you've introduced us to, because we just hosted Miko Peled here, which was amazing. And also just to connect on that level, like John Fussell lives here in New Hampshire now, and he's become a lifeline for me. Okay. He's like my partner in crime now, and it's been such a delight to have him here. So I have like 3 questions. One of them's kind of easy. I want to get my New Hampshire senatorial candidate onto that new policy thing. Is there a mechanism to do that already? Because currently she's our only peace candidate, Palestinian rights advocate, running for Jean Shaheen's seat. My second question is, you listed off a lot of the things that you're working on. And I wanted to know if you have strategically chosen those as the ones you feel are the most important to work on. And I say that because I feel like I'm really spread thinly. I'm trying lots of different things, and I'm never really sure. I'm trying a lot of different things just to see where I can make a difference or what I think is really compelling right now, who's going to have the most impact, but it still feels like, I don't know, it's like a lot. And the next thing that I am going to try, and if you can speak to it at all, is I'm going to hold a community gathering to discuss how to have Americans understand that foreign policy should be a voting issue. Because in the last election, whatever the polls, to believe them or not, they said most Americans said Gaza was not a voting issue. And in my heart, I know it has to be in the broader context of foreign policy. So that's kind of a subpart to my question about what you're working on and how you choose what to work on, because there's so many things going on.
Yeah, thank you, Karina. And also even like with CAIR, there's a lot that we do there, and from the legal arm. But what I would say is, kudos to you for organizing. And I think that's what you need to do, is community by community to do that. As far as, it's easy to feel overwhelmed. Okay. And so, for example, I look at, I'll use Bob as an example. He's sitting here. Again, Florida in its entirety with Rob DeSantis. And for those of you that don't know, when Rob DeSantis came into office, his first official meeting was where? You think at the Capitol? No, he went to Israel. Why? Why do you have your cabinet meeting in Israel? I mean, that's the nonsense that we have to deal with. So, and then for a little while, there's a gentleman by the name of Fadi Quran, and he would be great for us to invite to speak to all of you. So he's out of Ramallah. And Fadi is like a global strategist. And of course, since he lives there, he sees things on a regular basis that the rest of us don't see. And he was doing something, I think, that was done with apartheid South Africa, where they were doing these house meetings and basically asking people, but how often is it that in the end, it's about friendship, it's about relationships? I was able to connect with Tony through someone else, through this, PES group that we have. And he was very open. And then before you know it, I wanted Tony at the CAIR, banquet to speak, and he was there. And you just see it. And then we, Bob and I, knew that, Tony was going to be, it was easy. Even if he was not on an agenda, like if Tony's in the room, we want people to hear him speak because his message is so poignant, it's so important. So I would say, and back to your friend, John, who we're on the board together with Laila Al-Arian. So if there's anything you got also about myself, when I was in high school in the city of Moorpark, California, can you imagine like the faculty came together and they made a new rule and they said no one can be president of more than 4 clubs at the same time because I was president of 5. And I just say like I have a nice type A personality and honestly I love life. I like doing things. And in the city where I live, the big joke is when people would invite me to serve on their board, I would always tell them yes, but don't tell my husband. And my husband later would find out. And he would tease me sometimes and he really wants to get things done. He'd say, just pretend we're a committee, like about the 5 kids and him. Just pretend we're a committee so you can do the following for me. So to answer your question, I'm happy that you and John are working. As far as that site that you mentioned, yes. And I think what they're doing is they're rolling it out. I know they mentioned Graham. They mentioned Abdul, the senatorial candidate from Michigan. Also, I had just, Junaid Ahmed is already on it. So I think they're working. So if you send me the name of the person, and we can see, and if you're connected and you're close to that representative or the candidate, we can work on getting them that link. But I think that's going to be huge once it's completely activated. Did I answer all your questions, Camila?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. I see Bob's hand is up. Okay. Sure. Wonderful. Thank you.
Sure. Just quick comments. One is when you're arguing with people, just remember what the issue is. The issue is Palestinian rights. So don't feel the need to defend or to counter an argument. You want to make sure that you get a message across. But more importantly, as Manal mentioned, Fadi, it is really about relationships, because people will not care about what you're talking about if they don't care about you, right? Mm-hmm. And this is what we try to do in the museum, the Museum of the Palestinian People in DC, is that the whole idea is to get people to care, to see why they connect, not to feel pity for us, but to actually be outraged at what's happening, right? And that's why I wrote in the notes, if anything, by far the best thing that you can suggest to people is to go visit, because then they have their own relationships and their own friendships. Part of why Israel was blindsided is literally because you have millions of people that visited Palestine thanks to the International Solidarity Movement back in 2000. I was part of it and I knew like Huwaida, what have you. It is all that work in 2000 that the fruits that we're seeing now in 2025, right? Because millions of people went back, because what they witnessed is not only like the outrage, but also witnessing how much where they are, their country is so complicit in it. Right. So their outrage is genuine and they have a problem with their own government. They have a problem with their own foundations, right? So all of that capital is there. My question to you, Manal, is Florida is really a difficult place. Always pro-Israel, but it's also sometimes it's purple, right? So where do you see entry points? Because I'm actually very, very optimistic and happy to see Georgia. We have a Palestinian Muslim running for Georgia governor, and she's wearing hijab, and it's fascinating, right? So that is terrorizing the shit out of the Zionists. It's like we're in their face all the time, right? So what are things that are ways we could do something in Florida, because Florida is very problematic.
Yeah, and you're right, and it's interesting. Sometimes like I say to myself, like you go to a wedding, there's like hundreds of people, but then you're trying to organize a protest. It's like, where is everybody? Like, who are the leaders? Who are doing the right? That's why I'm so thankful, really, for Bob. So one point of entry is working with the Partners for Palestine group, because they're doing great work, and I know Bob has his hand up. But also, I think even with like the bonds, the Israeli bonds in Palm Beach. We need to continue, tentacles and connections and aggregation. Like that is so key. And like, go back to the ceasefire example. It was me seeing repeatedly, city after city after city doing it, that Ocala made the list. I knew, we were going to get, yelled at and, told that, we're not interested in all of that they said to us. But also I think about the experience. We had a young girl come that wears hijab here in my city, and her mother came, and it's cute here. And I say this lovingly, like her mom later said to me, and the judge was so mean to my daughter. Like she didn't even understand, like she had never been at a city council meeting. She thought like she was, in a courtroom from the mother, like, the mother that was born overseas that isn't politically, right? So there's way more education that has to happen, but that was a good, experience. Now the mother, even though she thinks she went to a courtroom, she was really, sitting in a city hall meeting. there's education. We need more of that. And I think my mom, Laila Al-Arian, God bless her, used to say, like, there's certain people that are living as if they're still back home, but we have to engage. Like, we bear a responsibility also, is we can't just, go to the mosque and stay within those circles. And for me personally, like Manal, like I was actually way more active in the business American community and got pulled into the Arab Muslims. Because where I, grew up, I didn't have that community. So Bob, we'll take your question and we can end the call. And I'm sorry that we ran long. And you're muted.
Yeah, mine's not so much a question, but just some feedback on what you said. First of all, Randy Fine is a piece of, saying nicely, crap. I mean, I can't believe we in Florida ever voted this, or somebody voted this guy in, because he's just nuts. You're talking about the terms that we use. I don't call, when people call this Israeli-Palestine conflict, I correct them and said, I used to call it an Israeli war against the Palestinians. Now I call it a U.S.-Israeli war against the Palestinian people. And when you start explaining it that way, it's pretty simple to explain. Second of all, I myself and our group, Partners for Palestine, which Manal had mentioned, I make sure that our focus is not sit there and talk about what's going on. We know all the crap and the evil stuff that's going on in Israel and with U.S. support. My focus always is consistently is what are we going to do about it? And I went up, just as an example, I'm tired of going to webinars and talk about this stuff, or so going to the same choir after choir after choir, talking to the same people. We talked about Florida being a red state. Back earlier in this year, I went to a class up in the Villages, and Manal knows that's about as ruby red as Manal's sweater she's wearing. And I made a couple of comments in that thing about this particular topic. I didn't want to over-dominate the conversation because I was a guest. And by the time I got out the door, two people come to say, hey, Bob, can you come to our philosophy club at Villages and talk about what you're doing and about your trip that you recently took to Turkey? So I did one of those earlier this year. About 105, 110 people showed up, and a lot of people got their support. So you got to go into where these people are and where they want to talk about and get comfortable with it. That led to another conversation that I've got at the UCC Church, or Tri-County UCC Church, that I know Manal's familiar with. I'm going to be up there coming up for a pitch, and Manal, you're certainly welcome to join us. I know you're very familiar with that. And then I got another pitch at the Ruby Red Club up there at the Social Discourse Club coming up in November that I've been sought out and want to talk about this stuff at the Villages. So I'm one that wants to go in there and talk about this stuff with people that make them uncomfortable, not talk about just the same old people over and over again. And second of all, that means Congress people too. And I'm very, very, very thankful to join up and have a friend now, Anthony Aguilar, who's going to join us on one of our calls that I met through this conversation and this call, which I'm so deeply respect and appreciate the camaraderie and how we can work together. It's pretty, as well as joining up with Josh Paul and his new policy organization. The network of people is growing. We've got a lot of smart people working on this stuff, like Manal and so many other people like on this call. It's a great place to be. I know we're all frustrated with it. It's time consuming, but we're going to continue the fight no matter what. So that's all I want to say.
And I'm going to end with, let's not forget, we've got Zohran's race in New York, Mamdani. That's phenomenal. And God willing, that happens soon. I know all those forces are in play to try to knock him, but I think he's so powerful. And Nizar, you mentioned Ruwa, running, and it's interesting, because we as a community are starting to say, we need people, to really run when they're ready to run. Is it a good decision? Because you've got now a senatorial candidate with Abdul that would be historic. You've got Mamdani. Ruwa's like 30, 31 years old. Stacey Abrams didn't win. There's kind of a mix. But it's good, and we want to see that. But we as a community have to also be strategic. And so there's conversation about could she also now alert and scare people to the degree now that they're going to actually buckle down and say we can't Mamdani in New York and Ruwa in Georgia. Like you asked, you have to also, and this is what I'm talking about, analysis. Versus just on that. There's just like this peace plan, 20 point. What does it really say? Or when people say recognizing Palestine, at the surface, recognizing Palestine is important, and yay. But what does it really mean? So we'll end with that, and I will be a guest attending regularly with you, and I'm happy to bring other really powerful speakers that I'm connected to, and I love that we're all staying connected and doing the best that we can regularly. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Nice job, Manal.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, Manal.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Appreciate you.